Hello everyone. In this video I am going to go over how to do a test question, how to answer it properly to ensure that you score to the best of your ability. So let's say that you see a test question like this. Describe the Black Death and its long-term effects. One thing that some of you might consider doing, I'm going to do this because if I were to answer it, this is exactly how I would do it. I could even jot down some notes to kind of get started with this. So the Black Death. I know that it took place in 1346. Knew that it spread quickly throughout Europe. I know that it eventually killed 1/3 of all Europeans. So I know that that's what happened, and I also know that the plague reappeared periodically for we can even say centuries. It reappeared for decades, mostly, but it did kind of reappear every couple hundred years or so. So we know that, but also the long-term effects that are very important, of course, is that ultimately it destroyed people's hopes that good people will always be rewarded in this life. So I've written that, and then also I can say that it also changed the way that tenants and their owners died, because so many people died. So many people died that farm laborers, could leave and get better wages. And so it loosened the power of the nobles. Now, one thing I'm realizing up here, before I get to the long-term effects, one thing I am going to put in here just as a tidbit about it, of course, was that it did lead to very sort of a long fascination with death that we can see in the artwork. And also it led to extreme religious practices. Okay, so we know that the Black Death here, and ultimately paved the way for the modern world. And with that, mean a less of a hold of religion over people's lives, a less of a hold of the Catholic Church over people's lives. That these things all occurred because of the Black Death. So I don't need to wipe out this. I can start writing right here. The Black Death hit Europe in 1346 and spread very quickly throughout the continent. It wiped out, I'll put here in some cases, because it didn't wipe out in some cases, entire towns and villages, and eventually killed 1/3 of all Europeans. We can say, although the worst case occurred, I was going to say was in, but I think occurred would be better. Although the worst case occurred in 1346, 1347, it did reappear heavily, we'll say heavily, for decades, and faintly for centuries. So you notice I'm kind of going through with my outline some of the things that I put. Not obviously, it's not required for you to do an outline, but it might help some of you, and I know that it would certainly help me. I think it's a good idea to get your thoughts down, but then of course to flesh it out, to add more detail as you write. We'll put here in the immediate after effects of the plague. Say ordinary Europeans became fascinated with death, and many paintings depict skeletons and corpses. We have that, and we can also say many works of literature had a dark theme as well. So we've got that. And then we can also say and I'm going to just segue here. And for this, I'm probably going to write another paragraph to do this. I'm going to say, however, it is most significant for the long-term effects. It completely shattered the medieval worldview. That God simply rewards the good and punishes the evil. This came to a close when millions of Europeans saw good people dying, and we'll just say bad people. I normally don't like saying things like that, but we'll say bad people surviving. This ultimately would spell the end of the Middle Ages and pave the way for the modern world. So we've got that effect right there. You can also say, I'm going to say in addition. I'm a habit of using that. I don't know if it's the best. I don't think it's the best, but I'm going to leave it there and I can take it out later. We can say, in additionally, or you know what, I'm going to say here, perhaps most importantly, the Black Death changed the way workers interacted with landowners. We can say here, prior to the Black Death, farm laborers were forced to work on a nobleman's land. And I will say here, the Black Death, or I will change the wording because we don't want to repeat it too many anyway. The plague, however, killed off millions of laborers, which meant that the survivors were heavily in demand. So the survivors were heavily in demand. They realized this, and many of them departed their manors for others who paid more. This would have a lasting effect on feudalism, because now workers had much more power and authority. We can say here one last sentence. I'm tempted to say this would also spell the end of the feudalism that was so important for the Middle Ages. But if you notice, I wrote that. I don't like the word "this" right here. I'm going to say worker empowerment. Good. So there we are. We've finished that. We have this right here. So this is kind of a good way to think about how to write answer a test question. And it's important that you can see that I have answered these questions. But I did an outline, which helped me out tremendously. But then I also fleshed it out with detail. Now, if you're on the test, I can erase this, but on the test you don't need. If you still have the outline, that's fine. I will still take it.